our colleagues in IT and on the Dgacm team, and as well our colleagues in the graphic design areas, the design unit, because they were able to transition very quickly into a full hybrid mode, working remotely. And that has its benefits and that also has its negatives. But also let me give a quick shout out to Martin and colleagues from IT who were able to arrange to get people laptops that they needed so they could work from home. At any rate, it was a difficult year last year, and I think PSS did a really great job, and thank you all very much with that. And the division as a whole did a really good job. You can see in the slide here that over 90% of the regular documentation workload was produced in 2020. So this is quite impressive, actually. This meant all of our colleagues in translation and text processing were able to do their work remotely. And if you remember, when we changed over to remote work, initially the schools were closed. So any of you who have children at home, you know how difficult that was, not only for our children, but of course for us. But that 90% of documentation workload, even though we stopped printing documents for the conference rooms, we still printed certain copies because they go out to get mailed. So our work still continued. And there was a lot of work that had to be done in association with that to making sure interpreters got their packets of information, their documents, etc. And that has been very complicated and a heavy workload as well for distribution, the distribution counter. Right now, where we are at the beginning of this year, well, this year isn't really beginning anymore. We're almost at the halfway point. We've done about 85% of the documentation workload. And this is really more a function, I think, of the documents that are being submitted as opposed to whether or not we were able to handle the capacity. What's of particular interest to many people is the number of meetings that were held. You can see that there was a big reduction in meetings, and meetings are the engine that keep everything moving here. So we had pretty much a hiatus. We stopped second half of March, April, May. They weren't able to really get going. UNCTAD was the first meeting we had in June, and then they started adding additional rooms to do the hybrid capacity, so we have more and more meetings. What we've done so far this year is there's about 703 meetings with interpretation. These, however, are all calendar meetings. We're not able to do any extra budgetary meetings. And there's a big pent-up demand in our clients because meetings is how they do their work. But overall, I'd like to really thank everybody on this call and the colleagues across DCM for the great work that they've done in this difficult situation. Next slide, please. So I thought it might be interesting for everyone to see what's the situation with the service right now. You may recall that we had colleagues in ITS that were moved over to ICTS in the integration effort that was, I think, starting back in 2016. Those posts are now formally transferred in the budget. So the PSS service has 75 total posts. Of that, we have 69 people who are working in those posts. So we have 6 vacancies. You can see, of course, that PSS, as you know, is primarily a service of general service staff. And then within that, in terms of appointment, about half of the staff have permanent contracts and the other half are fixed term with a slim number continuing, which is comparable to a permanent contract. Those 6 vacancies, there are 3 P2s. 2 of those P2s are being filled. One, we're getting somebody starting on Monday, a lady who was, I think, working for the WEF. She'll be starting in the design and multimedia unit. There's also another P2. That selection has just been completed. We're fortunate to get a colleague from Nairobi who's been working with the visitor services there. She'll also be working in design and multimedia unit, and we'll go in a little bit later about why that is. There's DDA's G7, which remains vacant. There's a P3 that we received in the budget that also is remaining vacant. And I'd have to go back and see exactly the other ones. So that's, and of course, the P2 that is sitting in ITS, the former post of DA, is also vacant. So those are the vacancies. Next slide, please. So in terms of staff, PSS is actually the most male of the services in DCM. So you can see that all of DCM, this is this line in the bottom, DCM gender distribution. As a whole, the division is more than 50% female. It's about 55% female. PSS, however, doesn't fit that. They're about 72% male with an average age of 50. On the whole, the division is quite a mature place. There aren't a lot of staff below 40, and this is something that we're looking at the senior management level to see how we're going to handle the succession planning, because it's great that we have so many colleagues who's been with us for a long time because they really know their work. They do excellent work. They have a lot of expertise. We need to make sure that as those people start retiring, that includes me as well, I'll be retiring 5 to 8 years, that we capture the knowledge and expertise that those people have. Okay, next slide, please. This is you may wonder why we're looking at the geographic distribution, and this is something that's relatively new. You may know that the P staff, P-level positions that aren't language positions are subject to what's called geographic distribution. And the idea for this is that the UN is composed of, 193 member states. So the workforce of the UN should also be equally diverse. So we're now being asked to keep track of where people are from and see if we can make sure that we have diversity. Now, of course, when we have a lot of G staff, that can be quite difficult because the rule on G staff is they have to be hired locally, and we are in the Western European and others group region. So when you look at this chart, you see that 77% of PSS is from the Western European and others group. And that makes sense because so many of our staff are G staff, and those G staff are hired locally from Geneva and the surrounding France. But this is important to recognize because it ties in with the Secretary General's effort to increase diversity, which of course the Director General supports, and I do as well, because a diverse team, you get better, that you generally get better ideas, different approaches, and overall in the end, the feeling and the understanding is you get better outcomes, as well as, of course, issues of fairness. Okay, next slide. So this is also interesting. As I mentioned, we saw the age of the staff in the service. So this gives you a sense of how many people are going to be retiring in the coming years. So this year we only have one retirement, that's Mr. Gerfaux. But we have an additional more retirements coming next year and the year after. Then 2024, it starts going down again. We're just down to one. But overall, there's going to be in the next, I guess that's the next 4 years, we'll have 9 people retiring. The bulk of those are GS staff, 1 P4, that's Mr. Bubnov, and 1 G7, that's Donna. Next slide, please. So we wanted to go a little bit into some of the divisional priorities for 2021. These are priorities that we collectively set at the D1, the senior management level. So you may recall that the position of the director was vacant for quite some time. So we were rotating the 4 D1s every 6 weeks. So we worked very well together collectively. Collectively, we established these priorities for the division. And they're kind of fancy UN words, but let me go into what they mean. The first one is assuring funding sufficiency. This means we need to make sure we have enough money so that staff can get paid and we can do what we're supposed to be doing. We can meet our requirements. Item 2 is promoting staff well-being and development. There's a number of issues around this, but we want to make sure that staff have a chance for professional development, and that people are not, for instance, being overworked. People are being able to have enough time and space to do what they need to do. Focusing on clients' needs, this is something that's really important. We are really here to serve our clients. We can look at clients in a couple ways. We have clients who are the substantive secretariats, so UNCTAD, ECE, OHCHR. We have our extra budgetary clients, refugees, CITES, etc. So these are our clients. They also have clients who are the end users of our products. So this is, of course, meeting participants, people who read our publications, but ultimately it's member states, taxpayers, etc. So what I want to do, one of the things that's really important to me is making sure that we ask our clients what they need. One of the things with having a lot of people who've been in their positions for a while is it can be difficult to catch up to the newest trends, because once you've worked through something, you kind of have an idea and you stick with that. So I want to reach out and talk to our clients, substantive secretariats, meeting organizers, etc., to see what they need. And I'll go in a little bit more into this conferencing today and tomorrow, which we're going to be reviving. And that some of you may have participated in. That was really useful. Drawing benefits from innovation, technology, data, and partnerships. The UN is getting very much into data-driven decision-making, is to understand what's really going on, getting the data, getting the numbers. And this is why there's often a lot of discussion. Some of you may have been involved in discussions about how we're going to update GDoc, discussions about updating print flow, impact of data on NDCO, for instance. So this is to make sure we get the good information and then we can use that to drive decisions. Innovation, of course, we all know what that is. PSS is really quite innovative. Technology, whether that's new technology like the updated our printing equipment, getting new equipment in the distribution section, or whether that's IT programs, software, we should make sure that what we're using is efficient and modern and helps us meet our needs. But I really appreciate that one of the things that's great about the PSS teams is people are clear that we don't need to have the fanciest, biggest, etc. if it doesn't meet our requirements. So this service has always, I think, been very effective at looking at, well, is it worth the money? Does it do what we need to do? Is it fit for purpose? So that's the approach with technology. And then partnerships, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Partnerships is who do we work with? And one of the things we've learned from the hybrid meeting, the transition to hybrid meetings, is how important it is that we work closely with UNIS. They do webcasting, that we work closely with Division of Administration. They provide the IT platforms. They do the audio visual. And really, unless we work closely together, we're not going to get the outcome we look at. But again, I know PSS has always been very closely involved with different clients and entities, and we'll go into that a bit more. Mainstreaming multilingualism. As the director of the division, I have two additional jobs in addition to managing the division. One of them is being the UNOG focal point for multilingualism, and the other is being the UNOG focal point for disability inclusion. So one of the priorities for the division, since the division is so driven by languages, is mainstreaming multilingualism. And Michelle Keating, who was handling multilingualism before I became director, had done a lot of work with Muge and other colleagues. We're going to be starting a UNOG multilingualism action team, comparable to the UNOG disability inclusion action team, to help find concrete ways that we can actually do things to support multilingualism. And this can go, and a bit beyond encouraging people to take language classes. I'd like to step aside for a moment and thank our colleagues. First, let me thank Daniel for his work with CLM in organizing English classes. And I'd like to thank our colleagues who have taken time out, colleagues in printing and distribution. And now we also have colleagues in CPCS who are doing this to take classes to improve their English. I've been taking classes to improve my French. I'm still not as comfortable as I'd like to be because, of course, I should be able to do this presentation fully in French. But it's really important languages, and the more you use them, of course, the more effective you are with them. I appreciate Martin's support for my efforts to keep my German live, but this is something that we're going to try to figure out how we can do more of this. The last item is promoting inclusion and accessibility. I already mentioned a bit the work that we do with disability inclusion, and I'd like to thank Mark and Martin and Serge and colleagues who've worked with them on, and of course the people in the Design and Multimedia unit who've worked on the accessible version of the annual report. This is very important. It's a priority of the Secretary General and the Director General, and I think PSS has really done a lot of work on that. I think we'll be hearing a lot more about inclusion from the diversity and racism standpoint. We'll see what happens with that, but it's a priority for the division to make sure that we support accessibility and inclusion, both within the division as well as for our clients. Next slide, please. So that's a little bit of what our priorities are. What are our challenges and opportunities? Now, we had a retreat, a senior management retreat on Friday, and Frank was there, as were the other D1s, and Marish, the executive officer. And it was really helpful for me to sort of articulate really what our priorities are. You know, the division is under the policy guidance of the Undersecretary General for Dgacm, Moses Abellion, and also they control our budget, Dgacm, and then we are under the day-to-day operational control of the Director General. So really the division's first priority is to implement the priorities of Dgacm and UNOG DG. So that's really our core priorities. And tied in with this is making sure that we meet our mandate, that we do our work. Are we able to print? Are we able to do distribution? Do we translate? Do we meet our clients' needs? Do we provide enough meetings with proper interpretation and such? So really, our core priorities haven't changed. We're still all about supporting conferences. And I was really fortunate that when I became director, things were I think, in quite a positive shape. Corinne had done a lot of excellent work. And I think as collectively the OICs, we've worked very well together. But what I think is very important, and I want us to give emphasis and priority to, are partnerships, as I mentioned, working very closely with our colleagues in DOA, taking advantage of skills and expertise and enthusiasm in places like the library to support our work. We also have partnerships with some of the other international organizations. So reaching out horizontally within UNOG, working closely with our colleagues in the secretariats, etc. So this is one thing, partnerships. It's very, very important that DCM manages the coherence between Dgacm and UNOG. So we work with both, we work for both, and so one of the things that I'm giving a lot of priority to is making sure that colleagues in New York know what's going on here in Geneva. And then when I find, and because I'm very fortunate to have regular meetings with our ASG, we meet once a week actually, so I get a lot of information from New York, which I also pass on to colleagues here in the division and also at UNOG, because it's important that each side knows what's happening. So partnerships and coherence with New York, as well as then, of course, increased communication with our clients. What do they need? What can we give them? And then also outreach and then explaining them, this is what we can do. These are our services. And PSS, I think, has done a very good job with that. So those overall are sort of strategy and tactics. Personal priorities, one of them is SHP. This is what I say in the very top bullet. We have to maintain business continuity. This is one of the 7 core precepts of the SHP, and I am making sure it is a personal commitment from me to the division that I will do everything I can to actively engage SHP to make sure that we are able to continue to do our work and maintain business continuity. That means that when they say, can you close down the print shop for a few months while we do work, the answer is no. That means when they say, can we close the e-building early so we can begin to do work and you won't do conferences for 3 months, the answer is no. When they say, what do you need to do good conferencing, we provide answers. So I'm very actively engaged in SHP. This is as well tied up with remote and hybrid conferencing. We need to plan for the return to work, and we'll have some more slides talking about that a little bit. It's really important to read the broadcasts, because this provides useful information about all sorts of things. We have some people who are working on alternative working arrangements, working from other countries. Those will come to an end. We have people who are wondering, well, what's going to happen? Are we suddenly going to have many colleagues, etc.? This information is available in the broadcasts. We're working on 2 levels. One, how can we plan to bring staff back? And then how are we planning to return to in-person meetings? The third point, supporting staff during evolution of our work. One of the things you may have heard is that the translation workload standard has increased. This is hugely controversial. There's a lot of work that's being handled at a lot of different levels, so I'm paying attention to this. We also have issues about hybrid meetings. You may have heard that some of our interpreter colleagues are having hearing problems because they spend too much time, listening on headphones very closely, and the sound quality isn't always very good. So there's a lot of challenges with these things. So technology brings benefits, but we need to make sure that they're implemented properly and that there aren't too many negatives. So we're looking at that. We are implementing a new performance management system. I would say this is a challenge. Hopefully we can find opportunities within that. I won't go into it too much. I hope that everybody has had their work plan started within the system, and we are being asked to upload some document into that by the end of June. So if you haven't come to a decision on that, if you haven't finalized your work plan, please talk to your manager. What I recommend is coming to an agreement on your work plan, printing it out, each party signs and dates, and scan that and upload it into the system, so then there's never any question as to what was agreed on. I've already spoken a bit about communicating effectively with clients and member states. I've talked a bit about making the technology work for the division. The division doesn't work for the technology. The technology is supposed to work for us. And I've mentioned quite a bit about strengthening our ties between the Dgacm duty stations and Geneva. And there is a monthly meeting that the ASG Dgacm holds with me and Shavona in Nairobi and Ahid in Vienna. So overall, there's efforts to increase the connections, bring us closer together, and understand the work that each of us do. Next slide, please. Okay, conferencing today and tomorrow. I'm really getting excited about this. This was done, it was 2018, 2019. Some of you may have been involved with this. You may recall Lisa Campbell. Those of you who worked in the Innovate team worked with Lisa. Lisa was the lead on this, and it involved colleagues from across the division who went out and wanted to understand what are possibilities, what could we do in the future, how could we help. So there were some projects that came out of them. One of those is the what they call the FAST, automated speech to text tool that we work on, that ITBAU provides some support to. But now that the conferencing environment has transformed so much, we need to revisit that. So this is what conferencing today and tomorrow 2 would do. CTT2, Mach 2 version 2. As we get moving on this, once we get organized, I'd like to find somebody who would work as the program manager for that, the project manager. We'll be reaching out to volunteers. Probably we may talk to some of the people in the distribution counters to get involved, because they are an immediate interface with our clients, other places across the division, and see what we can find. What should we be doing in the division to support our clients in this new environment? I don't see UNOG as really the most innovative place for conferencing. You know, we're not doing conferencing with holograms, things like that. But the idea is we gather the lessons, we see what technology makes sense, and then we, with our member states, set the norms for, okay, this is how we do conferences. So some of the outcome from this will be Geneva-specific projects. Some of it will feed into the global conversations that are already happening in this area. Next slide, please. So here's the SHP. In case you are interested, this gives you a sense of what's closing. This, I think, came from June. And what we're seeing here, let me see, just like October 2022 is when at this point they're saying they will be closures. There'll be closures in the E building. We'll see what happens with that. Maybe it'll be October 22, maybe it will be later. The H building has already opened. The executive office team has moved over there. There's a little block onto the far side that says Tempest. This is the temporary conference facility, and our colleagues in distribution counters have already become familiar with that because they're providing services there. But this can give you a sense of what's closing when, and then when we'll be getting things back. So we're supposed to be getting Building A back in, what was that, May 2022, June, et cetera, et cetera. We're having a meeting with the SHP to discuss the final destination for everyone in the division. That's been, a lot of things have been shifting, and I want to understand what the plans are and possibly see about having things more closely centered. Next slide, please. So here's some of the technical innovations that the division has worked on. I've mentioned some of them. GDoc 2.0, which is our publishing interface. So this is a lot of discussion. Daniel's working on that with the GDoc focal points, as well as with Serge and Martin and Anda. We really appreciate Anda's work on that because she's a veteran of GDoc. Virtual kiosk, this is through Indico, Documents and Beyond. So thanks very much to the Indico team and to the distribution counters. Hybrid meetings, I've mentioned about what a great achievement that was. Maxime Bobrov is supporting the audiovisual team as a technical moderator, and I'd like to thank everybody in the distribution section who is filling in for him while he is on that cross assignment. That cross assignment is likely to continue into the future as long as we continue to need technical moderators. We'll have to see how that evolves over time. The digital experience platform, this is something we've been discussing for a few years, be working with Vadim and Serge's team on providing an integrated web design as well as microsites and things like that. I've mentioned the annual report accessibility. We're in the process of upgrading the digital recording portal. That's on hold for a little bit, but that's going to be a big improvement. And then there's the work that's done with Indico. Next slide. Frank, do you want to do the updates on Indico for the group?
Yes, I can cover that. So as you probably know, we have been moving the Indico.un into the next generation of the CERN version 2. And consequently, there are quite a lot of activities taking place to migrate existing clients, be they in Geneva or other duty stations, into that new world of version 2. This is really not an update. It's a structural update in terms of the way it's all displayed in terms of functionality, and so on and so on. We have also quite some activities around new clients, notably at headquarters. Here, the MALU, the Media and Accreditation Unit under the DGC, the Global Department for Communication, is in cooperation with units here in Geneva developing the future system for journalists and or media in general to be accredited to meetings. Similarly, also for GAD, we have just this week the first meeting being organized through version 2 for an application called Petitioners. We are PLS, the Protocol and Liaising Service at New York and Dgacm, is obviously a very important client, and we are preparing the onboarding of PLS, starting with some advanced testing in the last quarter of this year. In Vienna, not yet using Indico.un, have started to use it right away from version 2. There was already, for instance, the Kyoto event, a large remote conference that was organized in version 2. We have also step-by-step more client organizations in Vienna at UNODC and UNON, but also in UNIDO and CTBTO. By the way, clients that are not in the Secretariat are managed through service level agreements, so they contribute to the cost of Indico.un. We are also starting with ESCAP and with the Economic Commission for Africa, and also have now, I think, the first event being organized for OPCW in The Hague. Integration is very important of a meeting participants management system, in particular the integration with Secure, which is the access control system being used by DSS, by the security organization in Geneva and globally in theory. So there is quite an ambitious project in terms of making that integration work, led by New York. And we have also successfully put in place a prototype for the Geneva situation, which we are also, by the way, starting to adapt in the Vienna context. Umoja is maybe a surprise for you. Why is that important? Basically, what we have seen is that many secretariats actually travel participants, or better support participants in their travel financially and logistically And of course, since there is already the information with regards to attendees in Dgacm, it makes a lot of sense to look at such an interface. You can imagine this is not so straightforward. Umoja is a quite complex project and system, and it needs to be carefully planned. And we have, for that purpose, specifically a business analyst that has been concentrating on this important work. Analytical module is about reporting, dashboards, BI, so everything that clients need in terms of making sure that the statistics are available, for instance, gender-based statistics, and et cetera. All this will be presented to the stakeholders meeting, which is a meeting of people that are interested, heavy users of Indico.un. So the next one being organized next week, and the first prototype will be presented to that group for their review and further direction. There's also a lot of things going on, as you can understand, a lot of infrastructure-related work. We have all this hosted at the Enterprise Data Center in Valencia, but still there's a lot of involvement from our side in terms of making sure that we monitor the system very closely and intervene if possible, if needed. Also to do things like disaster recovery exercise, just to be prepared for disaster that we hope will never happen. There's an exercise plan for December this year. There is a lot in terms of, given the big client base of Indico.un, user support is very important, and the gradual further implementation and advancing Indico.un. There are particular people in the user support and business analysis in charge of that. Last thing, Kira mentioned that already, fast records are available. Fast records are basically automatically generated transcripts of meetings. They are now part of the event pages in Indico.un, similar also to the virtual kiosk that Kira mentioned as well. Back to you, Kira.
Thank you, Frank. Olga, next slide, please. So I've mentioned some of the partnerships. I won't go into this anymore because I want to leave some time for questions. But I did, as I mentioned, this is quite important, and we are working to ramp up our work with library. I think they have a lot of skills and talents, and we can take advantage. Next slide, please. Just so you can see how well the service has done in terms of raising extra budgetary income. I think this is incredibly impressive, especially the increase from 2018 to 2019. There was a dip in 2020, which makes sense given the fact that a lot of, it wasn't so much that we couldn't do work, but it was also, I think, because a lot of our clients weren't in a position to be creating content. We're, I think, a little bit running slow for this year so far, so we'll see what happens with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to get a sense of the type of jobs that we do, I won't go into this too much, but you can see that almost in publications, it's a close to 2/3, what is it, 56% of our work is regular budget, 44% is extra budgetary, so we do quite a bit of extra budgetary work. And then you can see how our clients are distributed, but we do support a number of entities. Next slide. I'd like to thank everybody who participates in the EMS. Of course, that's everybody in printing and distribution, but a particular mention of thanks to our colleagues who are internal auditors. We'll be having an audit, as always, in October, and then we'll be doing recertification in 2022. So thank you for your work on that. Also, we've had implementing some caution signage for the forklifts, which is helpful. Next slide. So this is, in case you are interested, those of you who are on what are called alternative work arrangements, this is people who are working away from the duty station. The rule is that you cannot be away from the duty station more than 9 months. And they had a discussion at the very high level about this. There's a lot of concern when people are looking to stay longer than 9 months. So what we are asking people is that they are going to need to come back if they've been on an alternative working arrangement for more than 9 months. You should plan that if you are telecommuting from another country, working remotely. If you have questions, please talk to Donna. She can help you with that. She can also connect you with the right person in human resources to understand what that is. The last check mark here is important. If you're going to be going away, and only now, really only now are the travel restrictions lifted. If you or your family are going to be away, visiting relatives, going to the seaside, whatever, if your duties allow it, and if you are planning or interested in working remotely from that duty station, you can do that, but you need to submit through the online tool, and even for a period of a couple days. It's really important the organization knows where you are. So if you're planning on working remotely outside of Geneva or neighboring France, you need to please fill out the form online. I expect all of this is going to be coming to an end in the coming months. So for the summer, yes, but I would not plan to spend your Christmas working remotely at home, things like that. This is not something that's going to be there for the long term. We'll be going back then to the regular flexible working arrangements, which is where you can work remotely 3 days a week. Next slide, please. Those people who are considered at high risk, people who are breastfeeding, etc., that's a different situation. If you have questions, please ask Donna. We'll get you good answers. One thing to know is that vaccination is not being required for people to return to work. PSS knows this because many of you have been working on site well before vaccinations were available. We are, of course, encouraging people to be vaccinated. I've had both my shots. Everybody in my family's getting shots. But I understand there are people who are not getting vaccinated for whatever reason, sometimes medical reasons or others. People who are not vaccinated, of course, can be required to return to work. But so what this means is that other people around you, of course, may also not be vaccinated. But as I've said, people are well aware of this because of the printing section and distribution section being at work. Once you are vaccinated, please submit that confidentially through the EarthMed portal. There's instructions on iSeek, or Donna can tell you how to do that, but that's very helpful. So the UN does want to know confidentially if you've been vaccinated, but you do not have to share whether you have or have not been vaccinated with your managers at this point. Thank you. Next slide. Leave. This is super important as well. So people were allowed to carry over extra leave through the end of this year. You can carry over up to 15 days of annual leave. That's, and I myself have done this, but everything has got to go. So by December 31st, you need to have less than 60 days of annual leave, or you will lose that leave. Nobody is going to be bought out. You will not get a payment, etc. All right. So if you have any questions on this, please let Donna know, but we only have 6 months left in the year, and I don't want people in a situation where they lose annual leave. So it's not the end of March as usual, it's the end of December. And then if you accrue more leave in January, February, March, and you're over 60, you'll lose the 80 days over 60 as of the end of December and as the end of March next year. Again, if you're traveling, please understand, make it, see what the situation is. If you're going to get stuck because of quarantines, etc., that can be a problem. So please consider this up front. Also, 10 uncertified sick leave days. This says can be used. It's not that they must be used, but if you need to use them, you can do so. Next slide. Okay, so we do have about 15 minutes for questions. If anybody has questions, either feel free to raise your hand or drop the question in the chat. I didn't see a lot of questions in the chat. Yeah, so I think you could, yeah, Olga, I think you can, yeah, perfect. You stopped sharing, that's great. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask those, put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you. I don't see any questions, so either put your hand up in the Teams function. That's the little smiley face man with the hand. It does look like somebody kind of saying stop, but still, you can click there and put your hand up. Or if you want, you can just turn on your mic and just ask your question. So the other thing, just to mention, is we are having the DCM party on Monday. So everybody, if you're interested, please RSVP to the invitation. There is going to be ice cream and salsa and maybe badminton and other things. Okay, I see a question in the chat. Thank you very much, Daniel. How does conference service compare between New York and Geneva? This is a good question. I actually do not remember the stats, even though I've been in meetings where this was discussed. I believe that Geneva may have had more meetings with interpretation, but I'm not sure about that. I know that in New York, they are doing the return to work. They're returning to the GA, I believe, is going to be held in person this year in September. They're looking at how many people from the delegation can come, but New York is getting back more to normal. They're asking people to return to the office a minimum of 1 day a week, effective July 5th, I think. So because the US was ahead of the curve on the vaccinations, they're asking people to get back to work sooner. So I don't know if that, I'm sorry, I don't have, we can get the stats. So Muge has all this information. So we'll provide that information after the fact so you can see what the workload looks like between New York and Geneva. And just in case also people may be wondering what's going to happen to the D1 chief of PSS. So Frank is very ably taking that over for now. So Frank is the officer in charge. We're looking at how, whether or not it makes sense to revisit how that D1 is used. So that review is in process. I don't expect the post to be advertised until the fall, possibly, maybe a little bit later. So. Okay, Enrique, I see you have a question. The evolution of international Geneva. This is an excellent question, and I am as you know, I'm a big proponent of the printing shop. I think you gentlemen do excellent work, and ladies, we cannot forget Korean. So I think the team does absolutely excellent work, and we have picked up a lot of work from other colleagues. I think that one of the things that I'd like the new P2 to do is to work on upgrading and reviewing our marketing materials. Now, I know that we don't like to talk about marketing because that sounds very businessy, but effectively, as we saw, the printing section, you know, PSS was getting, what was it? It was almost $700,000 worth of income. That's not small. That is a pretty reasonable amount of money. And as Henri proposes, I think we can pick up additional work from other elements around International Geneva. I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil right now. People are really trying to see, well, what happened with hybrid meetings? Should we have paper? Should we not have paper? And again, I would say that parliamentary document production in paper is something that is just going to continue to wither and just get smaller and smaller. Publications is a different issue, and we have two aspects of that. One, of course, is the design aspect. That business is going to continue to grow. I was just reading a lessons learned report from the big conference in Kyoto, and one of the things that they mentioned for hybrid meetings was having somebody who can do web design. So as you do these big online events, you need people who can do design for multimedia products, for the backgrounds, for all the sorts of things that make an online event interesting and engaging. So this ties back to the digital experience project that we've worked on. This is partly why we've gotten these P2s and the new P3. And there's going to be a meeting with UNCTAD because UNCTAD is having their big quadrennial event that was supposed to be in, I think, Barbados or Bahamas, but they're going to do it online with a company called Web TV. So they need a lot of multimedia products. So we're going to meet with them and see how is it that PSS can partner with UNCTAD and provide interesting web and online material that makes their event, you know, integrated branding and things like that. So that's the design part of the house. I still believe that we are going to need, that people are going to continue to want hard copies. Holding a copy, holding the annual report, and an excellent job to everybody on that annual report. Lovely design, great layout. It looks very attractive. It's just a different experience than going online and click, 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 click. So I think there's going to be a period where people aren't sure what's going to happen. But my bet would be that when things settle down and we return to our new normal, we will continue to be producing hard copy products. Because you can mail them, they get into people's hands and they have a value. But the ephemera, the stuff that you print and that people just throw out, maybe not as much. And maybe when we get back to more in-person meetings, we may start having more things like posters and such. I'm not sure. And I know they're a lot of work and not necessarily a lot of income, but I know that's a long answer. The point about the use of GDoc, is this tying back with the fact that it's difficult for clients to get their request into the system? If this is the case, then provide some information. Maybe you can send it to Mark, send it to Mark through Frank, whatever. But I'm happy to organize a sit down with DMS again to figure out how we can do that. There is a push in New York now to encourage DMS to take all work. So some of you have been here a while, remember back in the day, and Muge may remember this from when she was in DMS, there was a big push, we don't do any work unless a mandate, no, it was all about demand management. So now we want to tell people, hey, take the work, don't tell the client no, tell the client yes. So I think this is something, but if you have concrete suggestions, please go ahead and put it in writing. One other thing, if you want to put your questions in French, please feel free. I can usually follow along pretty well if you want to ask questions in French as well. I see your comment, Serge, about delegate experience. Maybe. Probably. We should actually, this is something we should run a thing in the conferencing today and tomorrow, focus groups and discussions, and see what that sounds to people. We also need to include library in that discussion because they're very focused on their idea. Francesco's idea is a conference should become an event. We should do more with that. So I don't know, sorry for talking so long, but you guys are all used to me. You know I talk too long. So any other questions? Again, if you want to put something in French, I think one thing I spoke a little bit about what's going to happen with the D1. I think Anrik's question was really good. One thing to know which might be helpful is that even though we're monitoring very closely the retirements and looking at succession planning, as far as I understand, there's no, people should not be concerned about job security. There's no effort, for instance, to cut posts with people on them. We've been very careful about monitoring vacancies levels, and we're well within what's required for the vacancy budgetary rate. So in case you're concerned about that sort of thing, that certainly is nothing that's envisioned that I've heard in the coming years. Now, what happens 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, who knows? But at this point, that's not something that people should be concerned about. Ah, good question. Okay. What is the, yeah, and by the way, yes, Daniel, we have received 100% of the budget allotment. So if people have ideas on things to spend money on, whether it's training or some sort of specialized equipment, please send it to your supervisor. So Frank's question is, what is the biggest challenge for DGACM as a whole? I would say it's how we're going to come out of this hybrid meeting thing in the long run. I think there's a lot of movement in the technology. I mean, when I think about how it was in March, was it March 16th, 2020 when we left? And I remember leaving and it wasn't clear who was going to come back, if at all. And really within months, it was clear we could all work remotely. And you've seen with Teams how fast things have changed. So for instance, if you want to follow along by reading, I sometimes do this, you can put captioning on your thing. It's the three little dots up at the top. You click, it says turn on live captions, and then you can see the captions. Sometimes that's easier to follow what's being said. The technology is moving incredibly. Who knows, 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll see what is going to be necessary, how things are going to work. What are delegates going to want? So this is why we need to be actively engaged in the discussion now. We can't just wait for the delegates to tell us this is what we want. We need to be involved, offering suggestions, hearing what they're looking at, and providing feedback. As I mentioned with the hybrid meetings, some of our interpreter colleagues are having hearing damage from this, tinnitus and other things. But from an end user perspective, everyone loves it. Great, hybrid, hybrid, hybrid. but we have to make sure that it's done in such a way that it supports the colleagues who provide essential services. So that would be my thought. I think that how the hybrid meeting plays out as a whole is the main issue. It seems, for whatever reason, that the liquidity crisis, which was one of the big dramas last year, is much less of an issue. We'll see how that plays out. But at this point, we're not being choked for money or anything. So this is a great chance to invest in our future. Excellent. Yes, I miss PSS. Thank you, Frank. Well, I don't miss PSS because you guys didn't get rid of me. I stayed. I'm not leaving. So no, but I really, yeah. I mean, I had such a great time. I really, it was such a pleasure as chief of PSS. It was interesting and engaging, and everybody did great work. I mean, of course, we had our challenges, but I really appreciated that we worked together to make a lot of changes and move things really forward. I think in every part of the service has, I think, evolved in many really positive ways. You know, the printing team, an excellent group of colleagues. We've got good equipment. Clearly, we're ready for the future. Design team, adding all sorts of exciting skills for web, Instastory, things like that. That's been really exciting. And we've seen with hybrid how important it is to have good communication products. And it's a lot harder than people realize. But I still get comments about our backgrounds. I mean, I have a whole range. It's like having a wardrobe. I get up in the meeting. I'm like, which meeting am I in? What do I want to wear? Which background? So those kinds of things have a big impact on people's virtual experience, and we are positioned to really be involved with that. Distribution has done really well. The counters team, incredible during the shutdown. The work that's supporting the mailroom, work supporting the website, the work supporting Indico. And the challenges with supporting the interpreters, especially since we now have many, you know, each interpreter needs their own set of work. I know that's been very challenging. Workshop team has done very well. You know, people have done a lot of training in this period. ITBAU, they did, I cannot thank ITBAU enough for the work they did in cleaning up legacy applications. I mean, really, thank you so much. So really, and then the Indico team has done incredible work under complicated circumstances, especially with a lot of challenging turnover of staff. It's not always been easy to deal with some of our partners. I won't name names, but I think really it's just, I feel the service has really done great work and is in a good position to grow for the future. So, but I don't miss PSS because I'm still down right there in the midst of it. So, good. If you have questions after the fact, if after the meeting, oh yeah, that's a good question. Okay, yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think they will continue to convert people from fixed term to continuing contracts. As I understand, that exercise is still happening. I think you have to have had 5 years. This is a good question. I will check with the executive office and find out where they are on that. It won't be a big wave because they had to kind of go backwards, but there should continue to be a few people getting continuing contracts. If you're wondering how close you are or what the situation is, check with Donna. But Muge has made a note of this, and we'll check with the EO and let you know what the status of that is. But that's an excellent question, Jean-Marc. Thank you for that. So, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to send them to me or talk to Ben. And let me also give a great shout out to Monsieur Romanet, who is now sitting on 2 chairs, and we all know how complicated that is. But I really appreciate Ben is continuing to provide some support to me, working very closely with the ladies, Antigone and Olga and Muge. But he also, of course, is continuing to support PSS as well. So that's really great. But if you have questions, something comes to you later, please feel free to just send me an email or ask Ben. I get a lot of email, so I don't always respond, but the best thing that works really well is send it to Ben, ask him to print it out, and I'll follow up. So, merci à tous, merci beaucoup. Pardonnez-moi que je parle seulement en anglais, mais pour moi, c'est un peu plus facile. Et je sais, si je parlais en français, ça serait un peu difficile pour moi. Et aussi, je pense, en plus pour vous, d'entendre avec les mauvais accents, et la mauvaise grammaire, le mauvais vocabulaire. Mais c'est comme ça.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.